My parents got divorced and kept my siblings, but left me in a temporary shelter. But when they saw who I had become, they wanted me back. I was 13 the first time I heard one of them say it out loud. He's different, not angry, not even disappointed, just tired. It wasn't the kind of tired that comes from not sleeping, but the kind that sinks into your bones when you've already made up your mind. They never said that about my brother, even when he skipped school or dented the car trying to park in the driveway. They didn't say it about my sister, who could cry for 2 hours if her cereal didn't have enough sugar. But for me, it became a label, quietly passed between them in glances, in small sighs, in phrases like, "You handle him this time." I wasn't violent. I didn't break things. I didn't scream or throw tantrums. I just asked too many questions. I like silence. I preferred reading manuals to playing catch. I corrected people's grammar, even the teachers. Especially the teachers. My dad used to joke that I was born with a furrow brow. My mom said I never looked like I belonged in any of the family photos. Maybe they were right. At school, I was a weird kid. The one who read during lunch, who didn't laugh at jokes I didn't find funny. I couldn't do small talk. I never learned how. Kids figured out quickly that I wasn't like them, and they made me pay for it. I learned to hide in corners. I learned to eat fast and leave faster. I learned how to make my body disappear even while I was standing in the middle of the room. At home, I was tolerated. My mom once told a friend, while she thought I wasn't listening, "He just drains me." I don't think she meant to be cruel, but it stuck, like a definition I couldn't change. My parents' fights became louder the older I got. I don't remember a time when they touched each other in affection. I do remember slammed doors, unfinished sentences, and apologies that sounded like warnings. Then came the day they sat us down in the living room. The couch was stained from juice my sister spilled 3 years ago. My dad had his arms crossed. My mom was wringing a dish towel like it was the only thing keeping her from falling apart. They told us they were splitting up. No shouting, just cold explanations. Logistics. Schedules. "This won't change how much we love you." I looked at my brother. He shrugged. He'd probably known for months. My sister started crying. My mom pulled her into her lap. My dad glanced at his phone. Then they asked, "Do you have a preference?" Like we were selecting bedrooms on a vacation rental. My brother chose to live with our dad. Said it was closer to school, but I knew it was about not dealing with our sister's nightly meltdowns. My sister clung to our mom like a barnacle. No surprise there. When it came to me, there was silence. No one said it, but the question hung in the air like smoke. "Who gets stuck with him?" I said, "I'll go with whoever has more books." My mom looked at me like I'd spoken in another language. My dad sighed and looked away. They didn't decide that night, at least not in front of us. Later, in court, I wasn't asked what I wanted. I was told. The judge, a woman with a tired voice and rings under her eyes, said they had come to an agreement. I was going to stay in a temporary foster placement until things stabilized. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. I think part of me had already left long before that. The place they sent me wasn't bad. Not like in movies. There were no screaming kids or rats in the walls. But it was cold. Not temperature cold. Emotionally. Like the walls absorbed every word and gave back nothing. The room had a bed, a dresser, and a desk so wobbly I had to shove a folded pamphlet underneath one leg to keep it from tipping. There was a communal dining area where everything smelled like disinfectant and overcooked pasta. The other kids, they weren't like me. Some had been through hell. You could see it in their eyes, in the way they watched the doors like they were expecting someone to come back and never did. They mostly ignored me. I didn't belong to their tribe. The staff tried, some more than others. There was one who always mispronounced my name, even after I corrected her 10 times. Another kept giving me books that were 3 grade levels below what I was reading. I stopped trying to explain. I kept to myself. Read everything I could find. Rewrote code in my head just to pass time. I wasn't angry. Just somewhere else. Letters came from my siblings. Visits were arranged. My sister came once and gave me a sticker of a pony. My brother never showed. My parents didn't write. I imagined they were busy, dividing furniture, finding lawyers, building their new, separate lives. Part of me thought maybe they'd change their minds. Realize I wasn't that hard to love. Maybe they'd remember something I said once that made them laugh, or how I used to leave notes on the fridge correcting their spelling. Something. But weeks turned into months, and no one came. I didn't ask to leave the temporary home. I didn't ask to stay either. I was 13, but by then I had already learned that asking rarely changed anything. Things just happened. People decided around me, over me, about me. And I watched it all like someone stuck behind soundproof glass. One of the social workers' tall, clipped speech always smelled like peppermint. called me in her office one afternoon. She had two folders open, both thin, and a tablet she kept glancing at like it would give her the courage to speak. Your situation is complicated, she said, like she was warning me about weather. Your parents have agreed that it's best, for now, that you remain under care. They both expressed concern about your adjustment, your needs. I didn't respond. I'd already seen the way some of them talked about me in their notes. Intelligent, but difficult. Inappropriate tone. Not age-appropriate social behavior. One had even written, hyperverbal, emotionally detached. I just looked at her and said, which one of them said it first? She blinked. Excuse me? Which parent said they didn't want me? She exhaled slowly. It's not about not wanting. It's about what's best for you. Stability. I nodded like I believed her. But I didn't. I could see it clearly. My mother worrying about how I'd ruin her calm little routines. My father picturing me correcting him during dinner. My sister throwing a fit if I touched any of her toys. My brother probably just glad not to share a bathroom. So they did what was easiest. They left me in the middle. Not a burden to either, not a prize to fight for. Just something to be set aside until someone else figured it out. The others at the facility came and went. Some got placed with relatives. Others returned to unstable homes they swore they hated. A few were adopted by the kind of couples that wore matching scarves and called every kid buddy. I stayed. I knew the odds weren't great. A lot of families wanted toddlers, or girls who smiled in pictures, or boys who liked sports. I didn't smile in pictures. I didn't like being touched. I didn't pretend to enjoy things I didn't. One of the staff, I never caught her name, she rotated in twice a week. Once said I was a tough sell. I wasn't supposed to hear it, but I did. I was reading on the hallway floor, back against the wall, and she walked past, whispering it to a coworker. Tough sell. Like I was a used car with too many miles and no stereo. But I didn't get angry. I just wrote it down in the back of my notebook under the list I kept called things adults say when they think you're not listening. Once a family came to meet me. They had a son my age who didn't look at me once the entire time. The mother asked if I liked camping. I said not particularly. The father smiled too wide and told me I'd grow out of my phase. They didn't call back. Another time, a woman came alone. She asked me if I had any trouble following rules. I said, only the ones that don't make sense. She left 10 minutes later. Eventually, they stopped trying. Or maybe I stopped letting them. I don't know which came first. At night, I'd lie in bed and stare at the ceiling and wonder what my mother was doing. Whether my brother got taller. Whether my sister even remembered what my voice sounded like. I thought about sending them letters, but I didn't know what I'd say. Hi, still alive? Still waiting? Still me? Instead, I focused on what I could control. Books. Puzzles. I taught myself to write basic code on a secondhand tablet that had a cracked screen and barely held a charge. No one noticed, or if they did, they didn't understand what they were seeing. I wasn't drawing attention. I wasn't stealing or fighting. Just typing quietly in the corner, always typing. That was when they showed up. A couple, older than most who visited. No kids in tow. No plastic smiles. The woman wore glasses with a crack on one side. The man had ink on his fingers. They didn't ask if I liked soccer. They didn't offer candy or tell me I was brave. They asked what I was reading. When I told them, they didn't nod vaguely. They asked questions. Real ones. About the plot. The characters. The author's use of structure. The woman even challenged me on a theory I had about a scene's meaning. She disagreed. Respectfully. And I liked it. When they left, I thought that would be it. Another blip. But they came back the next week. And the week after. They brought books. Not the kiddie ones, but real ones. Heavy, complex. They asked what I thought about them. They listened. One afternoon, while the man helped me debug a line of code I'd written, he asked, softly, like it wasn't the first time he'd considered it, what would you think about staying with us for a while? I stared at the screen. The cursor blinked like it was waiting for me to answer. I don't really know how to be in a house anymore, I said. That's okay, he replied. We're still learning too. That night, lying in bed, I felt something strange. Not hope, not excitement, just stillness. Like for once, everything inside me wasn't vibrating with things unsaid. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't ask when or how. I didn't pack. But part of me, somewhere quiet, braced for the possibility of being chosen. Not out of duty, not out of guilt, but because someone finally saw something worth keeping. The paperwork took weeks. Background checks, home visits, meetings with people who talked more to clipboards than to me. I was used to it by then. That stage where adults pretend you're fragile glass while trying not to look bored. The couple, maybe future parents, kept showing up anyway. They didn't bring gifts. They brought time. They asked questions no one else had, like what kind of silence I preferred or which part of the day felt hardest to breathe through. The woman told me once, without apology, that she hated small talk. I told her that made two of us. The man joked that we were going to be a very quiet family. I didn't laugh out loud, but something tugged at my mouth. Close enough. I was still at the home when one of the newer social workers started pushing the idea of trial outings with other foster families again. We have a few options coming up, she said. More age-appropriate placements. I didn't answer. She was new. She didn't know yet that I'd already been through this loop. Later that week, she called me into her office again. She tapped the folder on her desk with her nails. It was thin. I wondered if she'd bothered to read it. There's been some concern, she began. You're selective in how you engage. That can be interpreted as behavioral resistance. I tilted my head. Or maybe I'm just not interested in pretending to be something I'm not so strangers feel better. She frowned. It's important to adapt. To what? Being unwanted? She didn't respond. I wanted to tell her that adapting was exactly what I'd done. I'd learned how to shrink, how to scan a room and know who to avoid, how to hide my intelligence under silence so no one felt threatened, how to sit through fake conversations without showing my boredom. That's adaptation. But no one ever called it that when I did it. The system didn't know what to do with kids like me, ones who didn't shout or act out, but just quietly refused to play the game. They preferred smiles, compliance, simpler problems. At night, I listened through the thin walls, heard some of the younger kids crying in their beds, others whispering stories to each other, some trying to forget where they were, some trying to remember who they used to be. One of the boys in a room across from mine, loud, always pushing people, started asking why I never talked to anyone. I didn't answer. He pushed again the next day and the next. Finally, I said, because listening tells me more than speaking ever could. He left me alone after that. A few days later, the couple came again. This time, the woman had a stack of papers in her hand and a small, quiet smile. The kind that wasn't meant to impress anyone. She handed the papers to the administrator without fanfare. The man sat beside me on the bench and said, "It's done. We've been approved." I didn't know what to say. For the first time in a long time, my thoughts came slower than my pulse. I stared at his hands, stained with ink again. When? I asked. "Next week," he said, "unless you don't want to." I looked up. "Do I get to say no?" He nodded. "Yes, you always do." I wasn't used to that. Having a choice. Having a say in something that involved me. I didn't say yes out loud, but I nodded once. That was enough for them. The final week at the home was quiet. No one threw a goodbye party. No balloons. Just a new name being written on the whiteboard outside my room for reassignment. The space I'd occupied would soon belong to someone else. One of the younger girls, tiny, always drawing, slipped me a folded piece of paper the night before I left. It was a sketch of me reading in the hallway. No face, just a body curled around a book. She didn't say anything, just left it in my lap and walked off. The morning I left, I packed in under 10 minutes. I owned 6 books, 1 set of headphones, and a notebook filled with scribbled code and quotes no one ever asked me about. I carried it all in a drawstring bag that had someone else's name half faded on the back. They picked me up in a car that smelled like coffee and pine. The seats were worn. There were papers stuffed into the back pockets, dog-eared and creased. The dashboard had dust. It felt lived in. The woman looked at me through the mirror and asked, "Hungry?" I shook my head. She didn't insist. We drove in mostly silence, except for the soft hum of something classical playing through the speakers. Not loud. Just enough to fill space that didn't need words. Their house wasn't big, but it had windows that caught the light just right. There were books on every surface, some stacked neatly, others falling over. A cat jumped down from a shelf and stared at me like it was evaluating whether I belonged. They didn't give me a tour. They let me wander. My room had a desk already, a real one, sturdy. There were empty shelves, not painted walls or posters, just space. Space that didn't assume anything about me. That night, they made pasta. I didn't eat much, not because I wasn't hungry, but because my stomach didn't trust it yet. The man didn't ask questions at dinner. The woman told a story about one of her students who'd submitted a research paper in comic book format. I didn't laugh, but I listened. When it got late, she asked, "Do you want to keep the door open?" I thought about it, then said half. She nodded. Lying in that new bed, I didn't feel safe yet, but I felt possible. I didn't unpack. I waited, just in case this was another temporary sentence, just in case they changed their minds like the others had. But the next morning when I came downstairs, the woman looked up from her book and said, We were thinking of visiting the science center this weekend, unless you'd rather stay in. And I realized something. They weren't waiting to see if I fit. They were making space for me to exist exactly as I was. They didn't push routines on me. No chore charts. No forced family game nights. No questions about feelings I didn't want to name yet. The house functioned around quiet rhythms. Mornings were slow. Evenings were calm. Books and meals and conversations that didn't require eye contact. The first week, I kept a mental tally of things they might eventually use against me. I counted how many times I forgot to say thank you. How often I disappeared into my room without explanation. How I left the bathroom light on. I waited for the moment they'd sigh or exchange a glance like my parents used to. It never came. Instead, they noticed things most people ignored. The man caught me correcting a logic error in a crossword puzzle from a magazine and said, "You should try writing your own." The woman saw how I rearranged the books by subject and not color like she had them and said, "That actually makes more sense." They didn't flinch when I got things wrong. Once, I accidentally closed a tab where she had a grant application halfway written. I froze, expecting to be yelled at. She just said, "Guess I needed to rewrite it anyway." There was no ceremony when the paperwork became final. No party. No new last name printed on a cake. Just a sealed envelope handed to them by someone from the agency and a quiet conversation on the drive home. I sat in the back seat again. No one tried to play music this time. The silence was comfortable. That night, they gave me a key. Just that. A small silver key on a ring with no label. I turned it over in my hand for 5 minutes before saying, "So, I'm really staying." The man said, "Unless you decide to leave." The woman added, "But we hope you don't." I didn't answer. I just slipped the key into my pocket and kept it there for days. They call me their kid in small ways. Nothing dramatic. Just, "Our kid's in the living room," or "He's got that project due next week." They didn't force labels. They let me earn them on my own terms. School was still hard. Not the work. That part was always easy. But the rest of it. The walking into rooms. The pretending to care about group projects. The way people said my name like they were testing it for weakness. I got used to being invisible again. But this time, it didn't hurt as much. I had somewhere to go after. Someone waiting who didn't expect me to be different just so they could understand me. One day, the woman brought home a flyer for a weekend tech camp. She left it on my desk without a word. I ignored it for 2 days. Then I looked up the website, read every line of the curriculum, memorized the instructor's bios, and finally asked, "If I go, can I leave early if it's terrible?" She said, "We'll be in the parking lot the whole time, just in case." I went. It wasn't terrible. The other kids were awkward in the same way I was. Not identical, but close enough. We didn't talk much, but when someone made a joke about recursive functions, I laughed. Not forced. Real. I started building things again. Small projects at first. A program that sorted digital library metadata more efficiently. A little game with intentionally bad physics, just to make people laugh. The man helped me test bugs. The woman played the game until she figured out how to make the avatar fly upside down and crash into the sun. One evening, while I was debugging something, the man walked past and asked, "Have you ever thought about turning this into something bigger?" I asked, "Like what?" He said, "Something that outlives you." That stuck with me. I didn't sleep much that night. Not from anxiety, but from ideas. I started sketching designs in my notebook. Not full programs, just shapes of what things could become. The woman found one of the pages and said, "This looks like it belongs in a journal." I shrugged. "It's just thinking." She smiled. That's how journals begin. A few weeks later, I entered a local competition on a whim. Built a predictive model for city traffic using open source data. I didn't tell anyone until I got the email that I'd won second place. I left the notification open on the family computer. Said nothing. Waited. That night, after dinner, the man said, "So, what's this email about a certificate and a $200 gift card?" I said, "Nothing major." The woman smiled. "You're allowed to celebrate." I shrugged. "I don't really know how." She handed me a bowl of ice cream. "Start here." They didn't take pictures. They didn't post about it online. They just watched me eat in silence, like it was the most normal thing in the world. At night, I still kept my door halfway open. Not because I was afraid anymore, just because I liked hearing the sound of them reading in the living room. They were my family now. No ceremony. No declarations. Just two people who stayed. Who saw me not as a burden or a problem, but as something becoming. And for the first time, I wasn't waiting to be sent back. I started imagining a future. Not out of desperation, but because it felt like I might actually have one. It's strange how fast you can go from surviving to growing, once the ground beneath you stops shifting. My books stopped living in a bag and started living on shelves. I stopped eating just enough to not feel dizzy and started asking for seconds. I stopped staring at walls and started looking out windows. They never said, "We're proud of you," in some dramatic way. It was more like, after I showed them a logic puzzle I'd solved, they said, "You're good at seeing what most people miss." Or when I helped organize their old files by writing a quick script, the man said, "You know that's genius, right?" But not in a way that felt like a compliment. Just a fact. That's what made it feel real. They weren't hyping me up. They were naming something I hadn't had a name for. At school, I was still the quiet kid. Still the one who didn't join clubs or eat lunch in the cafeteria. But teachers started noticing. One let me skip assignments because she knew I'd already done the extra reading. Another asked if I wanted to help tutor kids who struggled in math. I didn't want to, but I said yes anyway, just to see what would happen. The kid I got assigned to was loud, distracted, always cracking jokes. He called me Robot Boy for the first 2 weeks. Then I helped him pass his first quiz, and he stopped. Not because he liked me, but because he realized I wasn't trying to prove anything. I just wanted him to get it. He never thanked me. I didn't expect him to. My parents, because by now, that's what I was calling them in my head, even if not out loud, started leaving books and tools around the house. Not obviously, just accessible. I found a soldering kit on my desk one day, a guide to neural networks on the coffee table the next. They never asked if I liked them. They waited to see what I picked up. That was their way of watching me grow. One night, the man asked if I wanted to see where he worked. I said yes before thinking. He taught at a community college not far from our neighborhood. The campus was small. The walls were old. The classroom smelled like chalk and printer toner. But when I walked in, something clicked. Not because it was fancy, but because it felt alive. Like every person in those rooms was carrying around a question they hadn't answered yet. And that felt familiar. He introduced me to a professor in the computer science department, a woman with thick glasses and a coffee stain on her sleeve. She asked me what I was working on, and I pulled out my tablet, showed her one of the sorting algorithms I'd been playing with. She squinted, then looked again, then said, "This isn't bad." And she asked, "Who taught you to write like this?" I shrugged. Trial and error. She nodded. "That's the best kind." After that, they invited me to sit in on a few lectures. I wasn't technically allowed, but no one stopped me. I took notes like my life depended on it. Not for grades, just for me. Back home, I built more. I rewrote old code just to see if I could make it prettier. I built a chatbot that refused to answer questions unless they were phrased politely. My parents laughed at that one. They started calling me the quiet engineer. Not as a joke, just something true. I still carried scars. Not the kind you see, but the kind that wake you up at night with questions like, what if they change their minds? Or what if I'm too much? I didn't talk about it. Not directly. But once, during dinner, I asked the woman, "If I left tomorrow, would you replace me?" She looked up from her plate and said, "No." I nodded. "Not even eventually?" She shook her head. "You're not a placeholder." I stared at my food for a long time, then said, "Okay." That night, I unpacked the last box from the group home, the one I kept hidden under my bed. Inside was a drawing the little girl had given me, a cracked notebook, and a single crease photo of me and my siblings from before everything split in half. I didn't cry. I just placed the drawing on my new bookshelf, carefully, like it mattered. As I entered high school, things picked up speed. I got invited to a summer tech camp on a scholarship. I built a small app that mapped noise pollution using data from city sensors. It didn't win, but a grad student there asked if I could send him the source code. I did. That was the first time someone outside my house looked at something I made and didn't say, "That's impressive for your age." He just said, "This is good work." That meant more. My biological family still didn't reach out. No letters, no calls, nothing. Part of me expected them to. But months turned into years, and the silence got heavier. The woman, my mother now, once asked if I wanted to reach out to them. I said, "Not yet." She said, "Okay," and never brought it up again. I didn't need closure. I just needed to become. And somehow I was. Quietly, steadily, almost like it had been waiting to happen all along. I wasn't fixed. I wasn't healed. But I was becoming someone I liked. By the time I turned 16, my name was starting to circulate in quiet corners of the academic world. Not because I was loud about it, but because my code spoke louder than I ever could. It started with a local competition for high schoolers, some small-town university trying to build outreach. I submitted a prototype for a modular scheduling system that adapted to student attention cycles using passive data input. The judges didn't quite understand it. But one of the invited guests, a research assistant from the university's AI lab, asked if I'd built it from scratch. When I said yes, he nodded slowly, then gave me his card. I didn't think much of it. Cards don't mean much when you've seen adults promise the world and then disappear. But he followed up, asked if I wanted to audit a weekend seminar on adaptive systems. Said he'd clear it with the director. My parents, my real parents, took the whole weekend off to drive me there and back. Didn't complain once, even when the return traffic turned a 2-hour drive into 4. After that, small doors started opening. A professor invited me to help peer review a dataset annotation tool she was building. Another asked if I'd ever considered publishing. I hadn't, not seriously, but they helped me shape some of my projects into a presentable format. My first paper didn't make waves, but it got accepted into an undergrad journal. I wasn't even out of high school yet. My parents didn't throw a party. Instead, they printed the article, framed it, and placed it on the hallway wall next to a photo of me from age 9, reading under a blanket with a flashlight. One night, during dinner, I asked them why they'd taken me in. I didn't usually ask questions like that, but it had been sitting inside me for too long. The woman said, because we saw a kid who saw the world differently, and that mattered to us. The man added, because someone smart doesn't always get seen. We didn't want you to vanish. I said nothing, just kept eating. But that night, I sat awake for a long time staring at the ceiling, wondering if anything I built would ever repay them, or if the point wasn't repayment at all. High school passed like a slow fever. I didn't attend prom. I didn't go to football games. I didn't make a best friend who understood me without words. That kind of story wasn't mine. But I did build things. A predictive maintenance script for school buses. A local clinic database that cross-referenced appointments with supply needs. Little things. Useful things. I never put my name on them. But some people noticed anyway. Colleges reached out. Some invited me to interview. Others tried to dazzle me with brochures and promises. But one stood out. A private university on the other side of the country. Known for its research, not its branding. They offered a full ride. Tuition, housing, even a stipend. I sat with the letter for hours. My parents didn't pressure me either way. They just asked if I was ready to live far from home. I said, I've been far from home before. The difference is this time, I get to come back. The fall I left, they helped me move into a small dorm room that smelled like new paint and anxiety. They didn't cry. They didn't lecture me. They just hugged me, tight but not suffocating, and told me to call when I needed or even when I didn't. That first night, I didn't unpack right away. Old habit, but I did sit at my desk, open a clean document, and started outlining something new. Something bigger. An idea that had been following me for months. A framework, not just a product. A system that could evolve on its own, learn from input without the bloat of overtrained models. I wasn't sure it would work, but for the first time, that didn't scare me. The university environment was everything I'd imagined and more. Intense, competitive, brilliant, and still I stood out. Not for being loud, but for thinking sideways. I asked questions other students didn't. I broke things most people were afraid to touch. Some professors called me refreshing. Others called me a problem. I like both. Socially, I was still on the fringe. I had acquaintances, not friends. People respected my mind, but they didn't really know me. I didn't let them. My world was still measured in lines of code and silent cups of coffee, not parties or shared playlists. But that didn't mean I was alone. My parents checked in regularly. Always short messages. Never clingy. Just enough to remind me they were still there. Once, during a particularly stressful exam period, I got a package in the mail. Inside, a used copy of a book I'd once mentioned in passing, a pack of earplugs, and a note that said, "No one writes code well when they're sleep-deprived. Take care of yourself." I kept the note folded in my wallet. The more I learned, the more I realized how little most people understood about kids like me. Quiet, sharp-edged, resistant to soft shaping. How often we were dismissed as trouble or genius or both, but never just seen as human. I started sketching out a platform. Not for me, but for kids like who I used to be. A way to help them be found by the right kind of people. A reverse matching algorithm, not based on behavior reports or grades, but on curiosity patterns. Inputs that mattered. It was rough, probably too ambitious. But I learned by now that most important things start that way. I worked on it late into the night, long after classes ended. Not for recognition, not for revenge, but because I couldn't stop thinking about the kid I'd been. The one who read in hallways, waited for letters that never came, and thought silence meant failure. And I wanted to build something that would make sure no kid like that ever had to go unseen again. University didn't change who I was. It just amplified it. I still preferred silence. Still built better than I spoke. Still walked with my head down, scanning patterns in the sidewalk. But now I was surrounded by people who thought in fractals. People who lived in questions. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I had to apologize for the way my brain worked. That didn't mean I fit in. I wasn't the one laughing in the dining hall or playing late-night card games in the dorm lounge. I wasn't on social media. I didn't post my achievements or comment on others. I didn't drink. I didn't party. I went to lectures, came back, built things. I knew some people thought I was arrogant. I heard it once. Someone muttering in a hallway after I corrected a grad student's logic mid-presentation. Who does he think he is? But I didn't say things to impress. I said them because they were true. Still, there were moments, quiet, sharp ones, when the old thoughts crept in. That if I smiled more, they might see me as less. Sharp-edged. That if I joked, they might stop calling me intense. That if I gave a little more of myself away, someone might want to keep it. But I didn't, because the people who mattered already had. My parents sent messages like clockwork. Never too much. Never the wrong kind. Sometimes just a link to an article, or a line from a poem, or a blurry photo of the cat sleeping on my old keyboard. Once, when a group project spiraled into a disaster and I ended up redoing the entire codebase overnight, I sent my mother a message that just said, "Why do people like to lead when they have no idea what they're doing?" She replied 2 minutes later, "Because they assume silence means consent, or incompetence. Both wrong." That was enough to get me through. By the time I reached my final year, I had a reputation, not the kind you put on a resume, but the kind that follows you into rooms. The kind that makes professors pause when you raise your hand. The kind that draws attention even when you're trying to vanish into the back row. I didn't care, or I tried not to. My project, the adaptive matching system, had become my thesis. It started as a code base on my laptop, then a prototype, then a beta with trial users. One of my professors suggested I apply for funding. Another warned me to stay realistic. I ignored both. Instead, I entered it into a national innovation showcase. I wasn't expecting to win. I just wanted to see how it stood against noise. I didn't attend the ceremony. I watched the live stream from my dorm, muted. When they said my name for first place, I didn't move. I closed the tab, shut the laptop, sat still. Not because I wasn't proud, but because I didn't know how to feel proud without looking over my shoulder. An email came the next day. A recruiter from a mid-sized tech firm wanted to discuss potential licensing options. I skimmed it, then reread it. They weren't offering a job. They were offering to buy. I didn't respond immediately. I forwarded it to the man, my father now, asking, "Does this sound real?" He called instead of texting. Said it's real, but that doesn't mean it's the right deal. He walked me through what to ask, what not to say. He didn't offer to do it for me. Just reminded me I knew more than I thought. We negotiated for weeks. Carefully, slowly, every line reviewed, every clause rewritten. In the end, they bought the rights to use the algorithm under specific terms. I kept ownership, and I walked away with enough money to change everything. I was 22, and suddenly financially independent. No fanfare, no celebration, just a number in a bank account and a short, emotionless message from the company's legal team confirming the wire had gone through. I didn't spend anything for weeks. I still ate ramen, still wore the same jeans, still used the same laptop with the chip corner. Not because I was afraid to change, but because nothing I could buy would mean more than what I'd already built. The only thing I did that day was call home. When my mother picked up, I said, "It's done." She didn't ask how much. She just said, "How do you feel?" I thought for a long time before answering, then finally said, like I'm not waiting for someone else to save me anymore. She didn't speak for a few seconds. Then she said, "You never were." And I believed her. The news didn't break nationally. It wasn't that kind of story. But locally, back in the town I'd been quietly discarded in, it made the rounds fast. A former foster kid, once considered too difficult to place, had licensed a major algorithm. The term tech prodigy got tossed around. A couple of interviews I declined still managed to quote me from public talks. I became a name people dropped when they wanted to sound like they supported underdogs. That's when they really started coming back. The email started the next day. First, one from my high school principal, congratulating me, asking if I'd like to speak to the student body at some point. I didn't reply. Then one from a local journalist who wanted to tell the inspiring story of a boy who overcame hardship. I deleted it. Then another, this one from my sister. Short, just saw the news. Hope you're okay. No punctuation, no signature, just enough to let me know she was watching. And that's when I realized the silence was over. The past wasn't done with me yet. It had just been waiting for the right moment to knock on the door. I didn't answer her message right away. I reread it maybe 20 times, each time trying to hear the tone behind it. Was it curiosity? Nostalgia? Regret? I couldn't tell. It was too neutral, too careful. Like she didn't want to say too much in case I didn't respond. Or in case I did. 3 days passed before I wrote back. Yeah, I'm okay. Hope you are too. That was it. It felt like replying to a stranger who used to share your face at the dinner table. She responded quickly this time. Do you still like those weird history documentaries? I blinked at the screen. I hadn't thought about that in years. I used to stay up late watching obscure series about obscure wars. No one else ever understood why. She once called them boring dead people shows. I typed, still do. She sent a laughing emoji. Then another message. I'd like to see you sometime. If that's okay. I stared at it for a long time. Then I closed my phone and didn't open it again until morning. I didn't tell my parents. Not because I was hiding it, but because I didn't know what it meant yet. I wasn't sure if it was a reconnection or just a flicker of guilt dressed up as curiosity. A week later, we met. Neutral ground. A coffee shop halfway between the campus and her neighborhood. She was older now, obviously. Taller. Her voice was different too. Softer, but tighter, like she was constantly measuring what she said. She hugged me when she arrived. Quick. Awkward. I didn't move. We sat. She talked first. About school. About how she'd gotten into nursing. About how Mom had been sick for a while, but was better now. About how her brother had moved back in with Dad after getting laid off. I listened. Sipped my tea. Didn't say much. Eventually, she said, they talk about you sometimes. I raised an eyebrow. What do they say? She shrugged. That you were always smart. That they didn't know how to handle it. That the divorce made everything messy. I stared at her. They told a judge I should be put in temporary care. She looked down. I know. They call me a problem. She didn't deny it. Instead, she said, I think they were scared of how much they didn't understand you. I said, they weren't scared. They were inconvenienced. Silence stretched between us. She didn't argue. She just said, they want to see you. If you ever want to. No pressure. I asked why now. Her eyes flickered. I think. They didn't think you'd end up maturing this much. There it was. Honest. Awful. True. I didn't respond. I stood up, nodded once, and left without looking back. She didn't follow. That night, I told my parents everything. The message. The meeting. What she said. My mother listened, stirring her tea. My father leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed but face unreadable. When I finished, she said, Are you okay? I nodded. Just. Disappointed. I thought I'd feel something else. He said, People always come back when something valuable is involved. I looked at them. But I wasn't valuable before. She reached over and touched my wrist. That's their failure, not yours. For a while, nothing happened. Then the letters started. First from my mother, biological. Handwritten, flowery cursive. We've always loved you. We were just young and overwhelmed. You were always different, but in a good way. I wish things had been handled differently. We miss you. Then my father. Typed. Cold. Glad to see you've done well for yourself. Life throws curveballs. Maybe one day we can reconnect. Then my brother. Sloppy handwriting. Hey, Mom and Dad said you're doing big things. That's cool. I've been thinking about going back to school. Not sure if I can afford it. I didn't reply. They didn't ask for money. Not directly, but it was there, between the lines. The mentions of bills. Of things they wished they could pursue if they had the right support. They talked like nothing had happened. Like I'd just gone to summer camp and come back with a shiny medal. My sister messaged again. Said she missed how things used to be. I stared at the screen. Then typed, I don't. She didn't reply. A week later, my father, biological, left a voicemail. His voice sounded calm, rehearsed. I've been thinking a lot about what we could have done better. About how we let the system do what we should have handled ourselves. If you ever want to talk about investments, I'm starting something new. Could use your insight. I didn't call back. Instead, I sat with my real father in the garage, watching him repair a leaky faucet from an old sink they used for projects. I said, they're circling like buzzards. He didn't flinch, just said, that happens when something smells like money. I asked, should I feel guilty for ignoring them? He looked at me. Only if you think they earned more than silence. I nodded. They didn't. He handed me the wrench. Then you already have your answer. That night, I started drafting a plan. A real one. Bigger than a project I'd licensed. Bigger than a product or platform. An idea. To use part of the money, my money, to change the way the system handled kids like I used to be. To create a grant for foster programs that prioritized intellectual development. That saw kids as more than behavioral files. That matched them not with the easiest placement, but with the one most likely to understand them. It wouldn't erase what happened to me, but it might make sure it didn't happen again. And that felt more powerful than revenge. It felt like becoming. The distance didn't insulate me like I thought it would. They stopped asking outright, stopped sending long, sentimental messages. They adapted, learned to frame things differently. It started with my biological father again. He sent a link to a real estate listing, an old building downtown, not far from the high school we all used to pretend was decent. Just thought this might interest you, he wrote. Would make a great community tech center. Could be your legacy project. There was no request, no number, just implication. That maybe I want to give something back to the place that never wanted me. That maybe I should see that as noble. Generous. I didn't answer. A few days later, my mother messaged. Casual. Your aunt's cancer came back. We're trying to get her moved closer to home. Flights are expensive. That was all. No punctuation. No, hope you're well. Just pain, held out like a hand that wanted to be filled with something. I didn't reply. Then came my brother again. This time, he didn't ask for anything. Just sent a photo of the three of us, him, my sister, and me, at a birthday party from years ago. I remembered the cake. Chocolate with orange frosting. I remembered not eating it. I'd been sick that day, but no one noticed until I threw up on the carpet after everyone left. He captioned it, "Wild how time flies, huh?" I stared at the photo for a long time. Then I deleted the message. They weren't trying to reconnect. They were trying to remind me that I owed them something. Not money. Not really. Just attention. Recognition. A seat at a table they walked away from before I ever had a chance to sit down. That was when I understood something new. They didn't want me back because they missed me. They wanted access. Access to the story. To the narrative that now had headlines and grant money and credibility. They wanted to stand near the light and pretend they helped build the fire. It was my father, my real one, who said it best. We were in the garage again, fixing a drawer that had started sticking. They want to be part of your success, he said, testing the rails, but not your struggle. I nodded. Then they don't get to be part of either. Simple. Clean. True. My mother, the only one who never tried to hide behind metaphors, just said they made their choices. Now they're realizing yours have consequences. I asked, do you think that makes me cruel? She shook her head. I think you're finally setting boundaries. It didn't get easier, though. My sister kept texting. She didn't ask for money. She never did. But her messages came more often now. Articles about education reform. Questions about the initiative. A short video of a lecture I'd given online. Once she said, "Sometimes I pretend we grew up differently." I replied, "Sometimes I pretend I didn't grow up at all." She didn't laugh. Just said, "I'm sorry for not fighting harder." I believed her, but I also didn't know what to do with her guilt. I wasn't responsible for her peace. And then the final card came. A letter in the mail. Handwritten. From my biological mother. It wasn't dramatic. No long speeches. Just a page and a half of almost apologies and framed nostalgia. You were always brilliant. Too much for a house that couldn't hold you. Then the line that stayed with me. We weren't good parents, but we're still your parents. That was the moment I realized I needed to say it out loud. To myself. To them. To whoever needed to hear it. I wrote them each a letter. Short. Direct. You may share my blood, but you're not my family. Family is who showed up. Who stayed. Who chose me. Not when I was easy to love, but when I wasn't. I didn't send them. I didn't need to. Saying it was enough. The pressure faded after that. Not completely, but it changed. They stopped asking. Not because they understood, but because I stopped giving them space to pretend they had any claim left. I had nothing to prove anymore, and no interest in being cast in their story. At dinner that weekend, my parents, mine, asked what I wanted for my birthday. I said, nothing. They smiled. We ended up eating takeout in the living room, watching a bad documentary about failed space missions. Halfway through, my mother said, "You know, most people would want a party." I shrugged. Most people don't know what it's like to lose a family before they even had one. She didn't correct me. She didn't say, "But you have us now." She just handed me a blanket and said, "Well, you've got good taste in company." That night, I slept without checking my phone. No missed calls. No questions hanging in the air. Just quiet. Not emptiness. Not loss. Just the kind of quiet that feels earned. I used to think I needed closure. That there'd be a moment when everything would click into place. When I'd understand why it happened the way it did. Why they let me go. Why they didn't come back. But closure isn't something you're given. It's something you decide to stop waiting for. It happened on a quiet afternoon. I was home. My real home for a long weekend. My parents were in the kitchen, debating the flavor of a soup they'd made from scratch. The kind of domestic argument that came with laughter instead of slammed doors. I was on the back porch, laptop open, reviewing a pitch from someone who wanted to scale the initiative into something national. I wasn't even thinking about them, my biological family, until I got the text. It was from a number I didn't recognize. A photo. A new family portrait. My mother, my father, my brother, my sister, all smiling. A caption beneath it. Wish you'd been here. Still room for you. It was meant to sound kind, welcoming even, but all I felt was something cold, precise, and familiar. They'd never taken a family photo with me when I lived with them. Not once. I showed it to my mother when she brought me tea. She studied it quietly, then placed the mug on the table beside me. They want a new narrative, she said. One that lets them forget the middle part. The part where they gave up. She nodded. I closed the message. Deleted it. Then, for the first time, I let myself say it fully. They're not my family. It wasn't angry. It wasn't bitter. It was just true. Not because I hated them. I didn't. But because DNA is not love. Proximity is not presence. Familiarity is not care. My father stepped out onto the porch a moment later. He didn't ask what we were talking about. He just said, "We're trying that bookstore downtown later. Want to come?" I nodded. Yeah, I like that. And just like that, it was done. Not in a dramatic, cinematic way. Not with confrontation or screaming or accusations. Just a truth spoken aloud into the world and no longer resisted. They weren't my family. They were people I came from. And that's all. I had a family now. One that had chosen me before I had anything to offer. Before I had awards, or grants, or accolades. Before anyone thought I might become something impressive. They chose me when I was messy, difficult, quiet, afraid. They stayed. They learned my rhythms instead of trying to fix them. They listened when I spoke, and more importantly, when I didn't. They never tried to reshape me into someone more convenient to love. They never held my potential hostage to my behavior. That's family. The kind that grows with you instead of shrinking you to fit their comfort. I stopped needing explanations after that. I stopped wondering if I was too intense, too distant, too cerebral. I wasn't too much. They were just too little. Too little courage. Too little patience. Too little honesty. And that was their weight to carry, not mine. I started speaking at panels. Not about the algorithm or the money, but about the cost of being misunderstood. About how kids aren't broken just because they don't smile on cue. About how brilliance doesn't always come in a friendly package. About how we fail people not because we lack resources, but because we lack imagination. One of the panelists, an older woman who'd fostered more than 30 children, came up to me afterward. She said, "I used to think some kids just couldn't be reached, but maybe I just wasn't speaking their language." I said, "Sometimes you don't have to speak. You just have to stay." She nodded. "That's the hard part, isn't it? Staying." It is. It was. But mine did. And that's the only part that matters. I went home that night and added a new line to the website for the Unseen Initiative. Under What We Believe, I wrote, "Some kids don't need to be rescued. They need to be recognized." Because I didn't need someone to fix me. I just needed someone to see me. And now, finally, I saw myself too. Years later, people still ask me how it all happened. They want a version that makes sense in a soundbite. Something easy to quote. Digestible. Clean. They ask what changed everything. And I always say the same thing. Nothing changed. I just kept going. It's not the answer they expect, but it's the truth. Because there was no miracle moment. No grand rescue. No second act reversal. It was just a series of choices. Mine, theirs, his, hers. Some kind. Some selfish. Some cowardly. Some brave. All irreversible. I made mine. And they made theirs. So where did everyone end up? My biological father is still in town. Runs a modest business. Something to do with landscaping, I think. His venture never got off the ground. Every now and then, he posts things online about fatherhood. Lessons. Reflections. Always vague. Always self-flattering. People who don't know him think he's wise. People who do mostly stay quiet. He doesn't mention me by name, but he likes articles about reconciling with estranged children. Subtle digital gestures, like a man casting lines into a lake and pretending he's not fishing. He hasn't contacted me in over a year. Good. My biological mother lives a few towns over. Works part-time at a floral shop. She occasionally sends me postcards. Never with her return address. Just generic messages. Hope you're well. Thinking of you. I don't respond. I think she means well, in the way that people do when they're trying to forgive themselves without doing the hard work of apology. She still blames circumstance more than choice. Still tells people, when asked, that I was brilliant but difficult. That's fine. Let her hold that version. My brother tried to start over a few times. A trade school in one state. A retail job in another. Nothing stuck. He asked for help again last year. Just a foot in the door at a company I partnered with. I said no. He unfollowed me the next day. I haven't heard from him since. My sister is different. She never asked for anything, never used my name to open doors. We messaged sometimes, not often, just enough. She has a dog now, a studio apartment, a job she likes, and a boss she doesn't. She sent me pictures of bookstores she thinks I'd love. She remembers my birthday. We're not close, but we're not strangers either. That's enough. And my parents, my real parents, they're good. Still in the same house. Still reading at the same time every night. Chairs angled toward each other like two halves of one mind. Still gently debating grammar and theory over breakfast. They call themselves retired now, even though they still do consulting work and teach occasional seminars. They say it keeps them sharp. I think they just like being in rooms where curiosity still matters. As for me, I still build, still write code, still avoid cameras, panels, interviews. The Unseen Initiative is now national. We've helped place thousands of kids into homes that understand them, not fix them, not reshape them, just see them. We train social workers to recognize neurodivergence instead of pathologizing it. We build tools to help quiet kids speak in their own way, on their own time. And every time a placement succeeds, I get a quiet report. No names, no faces, just matched, stable, engaged. That's enough. Sometimes people ask if I'll ever reconnect with the ones who gave me away, if I'll forgive them, hug them, let them explain. And I always say, I already did forgive them, but that doesn't mean I owe them a second chance. Forgiveness isn't the same as access. Love isn't the same as permission. And blood isn't the same as trust. They chose not to be my family when it was hard. I chose not to pretend they were one when it became convenient. I don't need revenge. I have peace. And the boy they left in that facility, the one they called too intense, too much, too complicated, he grew up, not in spite of them, but without them. And that made all the difference.